Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guest today is Daniel Nivern, co-founder and CEO of Virtual Internships, an ed tech company that runs online internship programs across 18 career fields, bridging the gap between education and industry and helping learners from all backgrounds to gain global work experience. A graduate of Oxford University with masters in management and Chinese, Dan has a long background in international postings, including Europe, Asia, and others, which gave him the experience to build a company that creates internships. Dan joins us today to talk about how to create a world-class internship program that benefits universities, their graduates, and industry. Dan, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Drumm. Happy to be here.
Glad to have you as well. You have an incredible background with respect to internships and world travel. I'm really excited about this session where we're going to talk about the importance of internships for graduates and for industry.
Well, incredible is always a generous word, but thank you and much appreciated.
Well, I think what really attracts me to your background is all the international experience that you have. You are definitely not a UKer per se. You sound like you're from the UK, but with all the travel you've had, you really can look at things from a global perspective. And in today's economy, that is so critical.
Thanks again. I mean, it has become a passion of mine, traveling and languages and intercultural fluency. And I've been very fortunate through my career progression to have been able to live in various countries, and not just to travel, but to actually live and work in those countries. So it certainly is something I'm very passionate about.
And you've been able to see firsthand the importance of internships in other countries, haven't you?
Absolutely. So as by way of context and background, I previously formed a company called CRCC Asia, where we helped students from around the world to do in-person internships, tens of thousands of them, to go overseas to do in-person internships, so that I could see what getting an internship or doing an internship was like in the US, the UK, and Australia, but also in different countries like China, Vietnam, South Korea, and Japan.
Well, and the Far East countries have become so much more important in the global economy than anything else. What were the experiences? I'm just really curious. What were your experiences over there? How do they do internships differently than we do in the US, or do they?
Yeah, I mean, I guess and a lot of this was in an intercultural context. So again, just by way of explanation, this organization was helping students primarily from the US and the UK and Australia to do internships in China, Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam. And there are similarities. You know, there are the similarities of hard work, commitment, doing projects, communication, etc. But I think that I suppose the key difference in a global setting is just some of those intercultural challenges and intercultural differences. I suppose the first of those would be language barriers, but I think much more nuanced than that is the culture behind communication. So understanding things like hierarchy within the workplace that may differ from your home workplace or a domestic internship placement, understanding communication patterns, understanding the job market and what sort of jobs are available in a certain location as well. So all of these things make it different. But of course, there are some key similarities as well, especially as the world becomes more globalized and the global marketplace for work does become international and cross-border.
Well, for me, this is fascinating. I've lived, as we've talked about before, I lived overseas for 19 years. I traveled to 50 different countries, and I always enjoyed my experiences over there, learning the new things. And I can just imagine what it's like for an intern who it may be their first or their second time over in a particular country, and learning all these nuances, learning how different cultures work in the workplace, etc.
Absolutely. And actually, to be quite frank, this has been my life's work, to cut a phrase. It was originally, again, helping those people to go in person so that you could go and visit Beijing or Tokyo or Osaka to do the internship, but also embrace yourself and absorb yourself as much as possible in that global international culture. And then more recently, of course, realizing pre-pandemic actually, but that there are barriers to people being able to go overseas for 2 or 3 months to Tokyo, great as it is. My passion has been around virtual internships. So thereby allowing people still to get that global international work experience, but making it much more scalable, much more global, and much more accessible to the average learner, originally from the UK, US, Australia, still sticking with those legacy places, but actually increasingly also looking at how do we help a young Vietnamese student to get access to an international internship, or a student from Botswana to get international work experience. So making it totally cross-border and global by doing it in a virtual setting.
That's fabulous. I hadn't even thought about those type of opportunities, but it makes perfect sense. And to be able to, of course, my US-centric bias is going to come out with this one, to allow someone from Botswana or Vietnam to do an internship here in the US virtually. Is that possible?
You're absolutely right. And it's not a bias, actually, because there are economic and commercial benefits in that sort of cross-border relationship. And a prime example, actually, of it is a relationship that I've built with Botho University in Botswana, where the local economy, to be frank, is not always thriving, and there's not always great access to the sort of jobs that students and graduates are looking for. And so we've integrated, with some support from the IFC, we've integrated this virtual internship programming so that those Botswanan students were able to do internships with companies in the US. And as you may imagine and would hypothesize, some of those did lead to jobs. And it's a mutually beneficial relationship because the company has tried and tested this student, they offered them a position. And from an economic perspective, it will be relatively more cost efficient for the company while still providing a fantastic above market rate salary for the individual from the school in Botswana. So a mutually beneficial scenario coming out of these amazing cross-border relationships.
Well, you do this through your own company that you've started, Virtual Internships, and we'll get to that. But internships to me are, and you correct me if I'm wrong, they're solving a problem. The problem being graduates don't really have the key work skills they need to be successful upon graduation.
You're absolutely right. And obviously, I'm a huge advocate. I'm very passionate about this, but it's not just me that's saying it. There was a recent report by McKinsey that said 87% of companies feel that there is a skills gap between education and industry. From the company side, the companies are saying there's a disconnect. And it's very painful for the students and graduates as well who have invested time, money, a lot of effort into their university degree, and yet 35% of entry-level jobs in the US ask for 3 years of work experience. It's even higher when you're looking at higher level IT jobs. So there's a definite disconnect there, and we need to bridge this gap in the interest of all stakeholders.
Well, it's interesting because not only the McKinsey study, but the AAC&U, the Association of American Colleges and University, has come out with a couple of studies that says the same thing. You know, the number one thing that employers are looking for is teamwork, followed very closely by critical thinking and the ability to analyze data and draw conclusions. I mean, some curriculum give you that, but you've got to be very deliberate in the way you're delivering your courses, the pedagogy, et cetera, to be able to impart those skills and have those students develop those skills.
Absolutely right. And it is a combination. It's a combination of the technical skills, which you may have learned in an academic setting, but you haven't yet applied in a practical sense. And that is a huge necessity. And alongside that, the soft skills. And NACE, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, does very clearly articulate the career readiness metrics that a student needs. But how do you gain those career readiness metrics if you're only going through an academic course? Valuable and insightful as it is very difficult, as you're alluding to actually generate those soft skills alongside the technical skills through that. And so there needs to be ways that we help students and help universities, because it could become something of a critical issue for universities if not addressed.
Mm-hmm. And the need for internships is very clear. You know, more experience for students. They get them to learn these softer skills, working in that. But it's also, you know, not only learning what they need to know, but learning about what it is they don't want to do as well.
It's so true. And we're very much aligned with this concept. And I've seen it through the years of experience. An amazing scenario is that a student goes into an internship and gets work experience and realizes this is exactly the career field that I want to dedicate the next 30, 40 years of my life to. But there are those who go into it and realize that actually digital marketing was not for them, and they're far more interested in product or data analysis or something like that. And it's so important early on in a journey because you can end up on the wrong trajectory. And many people do end up in jobs that pay bills, which is important, but may not be their passion. And it may be that they didn't have that early experience and then just ended on a trajectory and had responsibilities and commitments, and you can't get off that. The world has changed a little bit. I think there is more of an ability to pivot, but it's still a very, very useful lesson to learn what you want to do or what you may not want to do for your future career.
I think that's spot on. So we've looked at the students and, the needs for the internships for students, but also for employers. They need more employment career-ready graduates. And this helps to develop those, does it not?
Absolutely. Again, there is that skills gap. And this is a global phenomenon. We talked previously about the sort of global nature of things, but globally, there is that disconnect in most countries between education and industry, and that need to bridge the gap. And it becomes even more current and salient in what I will perceive as a rapidly changing job market as well. The job market is fluid with the introduction of new technologies and job replacements, quite frankly. And we do need to help companies to be able to attract good talent or untapped talent, I would say, because we often know the great talent out there, but what about the untapped talent? And conversely, help those students to be able to build those skills so they have bridged that gap as well to industry.
Exactly. It's so important that industry gets career-ready graduates. And it's not that they're going to be able to step into a vice president or a CEO role immediately. There's building blocks they learn along the way. But to be able to step into that entry-level job, be able to work on a team, be able to think critically about an issue that's going on, those are critical skills that they have to be ready to use on day one.
Absolutely right. And you alluded to something quite interesting as well. You're not going to be a manager or a vice president on day one of your job placement. You may be a great student and you may be at a great school, but you do need to build up and build those building blocks. We talk quite often about stackable credentials as well, which is obviously an evolving piece where you may do your academic degree, you may do a coding boot camp, you may do a micro credential in a certain area, and you may do an internship. And you stack all of these together to make you a more employable individual. And I think we're going to go into a world much more of these stackable credentials where one of them on their own is not enough, actually. You need a combination of different learning points that will amalgamate together into this core, more holistic skills set for an individual.
And I think that is a great segue into how universities need to be thinking about this, because it used to be the university was the end-all be-all for preparing students, preparing young people for their career. And we're finding more and more now there are these other avenues that can be used. I think Arizona State is a great example of this, that they're offering degree programs as well as micro-credentials, stackable credentials, etc. They are evolving themselves to where they can remain that go-to place for education for a person's entire career.
Absolutely. And this really is where a lot of my passion kicks in, because frankly, it's an evolving landscape and there are more options for young people rather than just university, like you said, which was previously probably the golden ticket to a great job. But it's an evolving landscape. And I want universities to innovate because I want universities to succeed ultimately. They're a part of our great bastions of the US and the UK, and I want them to succeed, but it will need innovation and it will need adaptation. And you're absolutely right that Arizona State and Maryland Global and Western Governors and Northeastern, and there are various really great dynamic universities out there that are adapting to this. But the primary desire and need of students actually is employability. And every statistic backs this up. It's normally in the 90% range of the primary driver as to why a student goes to university. So if a university is not serving that need and demand and desire of the students, then they may, and they do, and there's data to back this up as well, question the return on investment of many years, lots of time, lots of money invested into a 4-year course. So it's absolutely critical to the continued thriving of universities, which you and I both want to see.
Absolutely. So let's go into some of the characteristics of a well set up intern program. I mean, it's so important that students get these to develop these soft skills and even harder skills as well. What do you look for when you're setting up a good intern program?
So I think the first challenge actually is supply of internships, because like all organizations say, like Uber or Airbnb, you benefit from network effects, and a higher number of internships or a greater supply of internships should lead to a more correlated and better aligned match between the student and the employer. That's not always been traditionally easy, to be fair to universities or others. You've got a overworked career service that is trying to get as many local companies as possible to engage with the university. But I do think there has been an opportunity through the pandemic and through the emergence of more remote work that you can open up the local vicinity to a much larger supply of companies across the country or even internationally. So I think supply is critical, and it's exciting that this concept of remote work, which obviously I'm an advocate of, does allow for that. So that's the first thing, is on the supply side. I think the second thing is back to the matching side again, but ensuring the alignment of objectives of both sides. Both sides need to be happy in this relationship, the company and the intern. So it's very important from an early start to make sure that matching process is well thought out, alongside set criteria of what both sides are looking for, what tasks they're looking for, what skills they're looking to gain, what skills they already have and would like to offer to the company. And then beyond that, I think it's the interview process is important. I think it's always important there is verbal communication in advance of the program. And then personally, the way that I've built programs before is I like to focus on project-based internships, because I think the idea of just leaving it ad hoc and spontaneous does have some value and can give good experiences. But I think it's also important, and especially in a remote setting actually, that there is project-based internships. So devising, for example, 3 to 5 mini projects that form a portfolio for the intern so they can feel that they've accomplished certain tasks that are project-based and are tangible deliverables. Mm. And then I would say that the last two pieces that are critical are communication throughout the internship. We do this ourselves by integrating a feedback loop that is two-way. So it's the host company supervisor giving feedback to the intern in a structured, formalized manner, primarily on a weekly basis. At the very least, it should be daily, but weekly in a formalized manner, to how they're doing, how they're progressing, what tasks they've accomplished. And likewise, the intern giving feedback to the company. It's important that the intern gets used to communicating upwards, understanding what it means to show off what they've done, but also ask for help, ask for support, ask for advice, and ask for feedback. There's no point sitting, hiding away and being afraid of this. And then I would say the last piece is integration. And I think this is a commitment on both sides, that the company helps to integrate the intern, and the intern makes best efforts to be integrated into the company. And in an in-person setting, there are obvious cues for this, going around and speaking to everybody that you possibly can. And in a virtual setting, it may mean being part of the online communication channels, the Slack groups, the all hands town halls that the company may run, etc., the different forms of integration. But these are some of the things that are really important to getting a good internship. And that it is important that all of these things are well considered in advance of the programming.
I think those are great things. And those are things all universities should be thinking about when they're setting up these intern programs. A couple of things that really jumped out: the alignment of objectives and project-based internships. You need high tangible outcomes written. This is what you're going to get out of this. This is what we expect you to do, et cetera. It's almost as though you've got a contract between the company and the student.
Yeah, absolutely. We call it our project placement plan, and it is signed off by the company, and the student sees it in advance of the internship. And this alignment in advance manages expectations on both sides. Again, work is not always glamorous. There will be great projects in there, and there may be some gritty projects in there. And that is part of learning and part of development as well. But it's important that this is aligned in advance, because otherwise you could see a breakdown in the middle, and nobody wants to see that. So upfront alignment of objective setting is absolutely essential.
Mm-hmm. And when a company advertises an intern project or an internship, Are all these things generally spelled out? Are they worked together with the intern, or is it a combination thereof?
It's a great question. So the way our matching process works is, again, feeding in various inputs from both sides in terms of what they're looking for, what skill sets they have, how they like to communicate, etc. We always ensure that there is an interview, and then the project placement plan is done on the back of that. So we do assist and we do guide companies with templates for how we suggest a project placement plan should be structured. But it is important as well that there is a discretionary ability of the company to align that with what they've learned from the intern through their interview calls. You can really understand what they're looking for and again, relay that back to what you're looking for as a company. It is done in accordance with what they've learned from the intern.
And so if a university is setting up one of these programs, they've got to develop the supply of internships. They've got to be scalable, the alignment of the objectives, all of those 6 things that you talked about. But there's different models of internships. I mean, we've talked a little bit about the face-to-face, but there's also online, like what your firm does, but there's also simulations as well. What are some of the pros and cons of each of those?
Yeah, that's right. And as an advocate of work experience in general, I'm very much in favor of all optionality. And some of them can piggyback on the other. They're not exclusive. You don't just have to do one or the other. So there's, of course, in-person internships, which are very valuable. You are getting the skills of understanding people in the workplace. You see some of the small nuances. You get the water cooler moment where you may bump into the CEO and get 3 minutes to chat to him or her, which is great. You get virtual internships, which of course is my personal passion, which has a lot of that. It doesn't always have the water cooler moment, but it does have that insight into the future of remote work and how to use online tools for remote work, which is obviously a fast increasing trend. You mentioned simulation approaches. So there are organizations out there, sort of intermediary organizations that may partner with a Google or a Microsoft to run a program that gives an insight into the workplace. So you may not actually work for Microsoft, but you get a bit of an insight into what life may be like. I think they all have their virtues and they may all have their flaws as well. I have my own personal passion, but what I'm really passionate about is this idea of optionality and trying to ensure that as many students as possible on a scalable basis have as tangible as possible high outcome driven employability learning, because I think that is for the betterment of the student, the betterment of the university, the betterment of industry, and the betterment of countries on a macro level as well.
One of the things that struck me about what you're doing with virtual internships was the ability to have students be able to do internships across the globe, whether it be students from other countries here to the U.S., or our students going to other countries, etc. In-person internships are really good things. In fact, I suspect you're going to get different learnings either way. But the in-person are generally, not always, but generally focused on local area that the student lives in or where the university is, where they live in, etc. That can be a limiting factor, can it not?
Absolutely. So I'm an advocate of in-person internships. Again, I helped over 10,000 students to do in-person internships, and you can and do get great outcomes from it. But what always frustrated me a little bit was the accessibility piece. Not everybody can do it. You're restricted to your local vicinity. You have to dedicate a lot of time, commuting time, in-person time. The company has to dedicate a workspace as well, which comes at a cost. And for those who are in study or have family commitments or work commitments, let alone pandemics and warfare and the sheer cost of it, virtual does offer a much more scalable and accessible and equitable approach to it with many of the same advantages. So I do think it does open up a really amazing opportunity for us and for students. And as you said, that international component as well. We realize that there is only a minority of students who are able to do study abroad, and the US is fantastic at advocating for study abroad and helping to fund study abroad, but still it's only a very small minority who do actually go overseas in person. So this almost gives a taste or whets the appetite of an international experience or a domestic experience alongside boosting employability as well. So it really solves a couple of potential challenges.
And those are important to note because I've known a number of folks who have gone over on, their senior experience, the trip overseas, et cetera, and they go for 1-2 weeks. In fact, we did a podcast with Robin Simon, who's a Emmy award-winning producer, about these type of things. It whets their appetite, but it doesn't necessarily give them the work experience that they need. The ability to be able to go over to, say, like Spain for a semester and study over there remotely, do an internship, etc. You've got to be able to have a certain kind of person to be able to do this. But if they're able to do it, the experience, I would assume, is just incredible.
Absolutely. And we've got to help more people, to get internships. And there's an absolute bonus advantage if you could get an international internship. Again, whether that's in person, which is great, but there are lots of barriers, or virtually as well, just so you can take part in that experience. And it's exactly what we're seeing. Even if it's in the same language, we have partnerships with British universities, and actually one of our first partnerships was with the University of Birmingham, and hope Sam will forgive me for mentioning him, but one of our first interns in a virtual setting was a British intern working for an American sports company in Silicon Valley, and ended up getting a full-time job with that company in Silicon Valley. So there are amazing intercultural opportunities, and they could come across languages, but they may even be in the same language, but can result in a full-time position, which is, of course, one of the key objectives.
Well, England, America, it's two different languages. We all know that.
It can be. I spent 7 good years in the US, and my 2 children are American citizens, but it can be different language at times.
Well, we watch a lot of British television, and every once in a while a term will come up. It's like, what does that mean? And, you go up to the dictionary and look it up, or Wikipedia or whatever, and you figure it out. You said one thing when we were speaking a few days ago that really struck one thing. You said a lot of things that really struck me, but one in particular, from the university side, what making internships successful is making sure they get integrated into the curriculum. Can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
And again, this is another point of passion for myself, because I think when it's integrated into the curriculum, obviously it increases its own prestige. And the way we do it is we do it through it being accredited in the curriculum. So there are various ways of approaching this. One way we work with organizations is through our own school of record. So they can transfer credit through our school of record. And so the student does the virtual internship program and gets credit, normally 3, 6, or 9 credits for doing it. Or they can use and issue their own credit and accredit the program itself. So it's being done through the home institution and is accredited in that way. I think it places a higher value on the programming, and I think it's extremely well received by the students. There is a lot of data out there. Strada in particular do some really great research reports on the correlation between student satisfaction and when internships and employability programming is embedded into the curriculum. So we know that students feel much more satisfied with their university course when it has been embedded into the curriculum, and feel that it's a stronger return on investment for doing it. So the way we like to do it again is integrate it. It may be a Masters of International Business program or an undergrad in computer science, and 1 semester of programming is dedicated a virtual internship that can be done in that field across maybe 8 or 12 weeks, and for 3, 6, or 9 credits in our system. And that's how we work with Arizona State, for example. It's how we work with Potsdam University, a rural campus in upstate New York. And it's how we work with Aston University in the United Kingdom as well, one of our great partners there. So it's something we advocate for. I do actually see a future where this will be embedded into every curriculum, because I think it's going to be a necessity.
I think you're absolutely right. Dan, this has been fabulous. I want to thank you. 3 takeaways for university presidents and boards. What do they need to be thinking about with respect to internships? Because they are critical in today's world.
Well, I'm going to be a little facetious. And I remember Tony Blair in an election campaign once said, our priority was, is, and always will be education, education, education. And I will say that ours is employability, employability, employability. To break that down a little bit, as I've said throughout this conversation, it's what students want. It's actually a duty to provide and give students what they want, given the investment that they're putting into it. I would like university presidents to look at it with that level of importance, and look at it from a way of how to implement it in a scalable and high income way that will adapt with the fluidity of the job market. And I think finally, alongside it being a duty and looking at it from a scalable and high outcome way, how do you make it as equitable as possible so that students from diverse backgrounds and underrepresented backgrounds who traditionally, according to the data, find it most difficult by far to source internships, finding a way to make it as equitable as possible. Those are my 3 dreams for university presidents.
I think those are very doable. Thank you. Thank you. So what's next for you and your firm, Virtual Internships?
The cliche would be to say some form of AI approach. And of course, we are looking at AI and we're looking at how it's changing the job market and what that will mean for students. I think it may mean some of it becomes even more competitive to get an internship, but there is an opportunity for students to come with skills of how to use AI-driven tools that can really benefit a company that doesn't have it. And we're going to go into this area a little bit. But what really is there for us is staying focused on what we do best, optimizing how a virtual internship is structured, making it as accessible and scalable for all, and speaking to universities of how they can integrate this into their curriculum for credit-bearing programs and for credit so that every student across those campuses can do it, especially in places like the US where we're seeing great traction and momentum. So that's, again, my dream for VI, and it correlates a little bit with my dream for university presidents.
Well, very good. Dan, thank you so much for being on the program. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to the next time.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it as well, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening, and a special thank you to our guest today, Dan Nivern, co-founder and CEO at Virtual Internships. Dan, thanks for sharing your insights on the importance of internships and for some great tips for presidents and boards on how to set up a world-class internship program that benefits universities, their graduates, and the industry. Until next time, thank you, listeners.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.